Imagine a man so wealthy that he literally broke the economy of an entire country just by giving away gold left and right. Imagine that his fortune was several times greater than that of the richest people today: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. And now think about this, you've probably never even heard his name. His name was Mansa Musa. And he wasn't a fictional character, not a legend, not a mythical king, he was a real ruler. And not just any ruler, but the leader of the richest empire in the entire history of humanity. But if he was so great, why don't we know anything about him? Why isn't he mentioned in school, in universities, in the news? Why isn't his name ranked alongside Caesar, Napoleon, or Alexander the Great? The answer is simple. The story of Mansa Musa is a story that was meant to be forgotten. Because it breaks the traditional view of the world. Because it proves that Africa is not just about colonies, poverty, and tribes. It is also about civilizations that were richer and more powerful than most European nations. Let's start with who he was. Mansa Musa became the ruler of the Mali Empire in the year 1312. He did not seize power through violence or a coup. He was the deputy of the king, who had gone on an expedition across the Atlantic and, according to chronicles, never returned. So, by law, Musa became the next ruler. And this is where it gets interesting. At that time, Mali was a gigantic empire. Its lands stretched from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the borders of Chad in the east. It included territories of present-day Mali, Senegal, Guinea, Niger, Mauritania, and even parts of Algeria. It was one of the largest empires in the world by land, population, and resources. But the most important thing was, the Mali Empire controlled gold. Nearly half of the world's gold supply at that time was mined on its land. And this gold didn't just flow in rivers, it flowed in seas. Mansa Musa bathed in gold, quite literally. Unlike many rulers, he didn't hide his wealth in vaults or castles. He used it for construction, trade, science, and religion. But the most impressive act was his pilgrimage to Mecca. We'll talk more about it later, but even now it's clear, this journey changed the entire Islamic world and made Musa's name immortal, at least in the chronicles of the Arab world. Historians and economists still argue about exactly how much gold he had. But some estimate his net worth at $400 billion by today's standards. That's nearly twice as much as the wealthiest person of the 21st century. But this is not just a story about money. It's a story about power, civilization, culture, about how one empire could become the center of the world, and how quickly its name could be forgotten. Someone might say, so what, just a rich king? Why should we care? Now imagine this, in human history, a figure with such influence is simply erased from textbooks. They told us about Columbus, Caesar, Napoleon, Lenin, Mao, but not about Musa. Why? Because everything related to a great Africa was hidden. Because stories like this don't fit the comfortable narrative. Africa was savage, and only Europe brought civilization there. But Mali was great long before the colonizers arrived. And now, in the 21st century, the world is rediscovering this story. Mansa Musa is becoming a symbol of forgotten wealth, a lost empire, and treasures buried beneath the sands of the Sahara. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa set out on a pilgrimage to Mecca. This was not merely a religious gesture, it was a demonstration of power, scale, and above all, wealth. He did not travel alone. Accompanying him was a vast entourage, 60,000 people. Among them were warriors, officials, slaves, musicians, scholars, and simple servants. And also 80 camels, each carrying up to 130 kilograms of gold. Just imagine, a caravan stretching for dozens of kilometers, laden with golden gifts. Each of his people wore silk garments adorned with jewels, and the horses were saddled not for war, but for a parade of riches. This was no exaggeration, it was a deliberate statement. Look who I am. And what the Empire of Mali is. When Mansa Musa arrived in Cairo, the capital of Egypt at that time, the city stood still in awe. The Egyptian sultan didn't immediately grasp who he was dealing with. But soon it became clear, such gold, such splendor, such magnitude, no one had ever seen anything like it. Mansa Musa began handing out gold left and right. He gave it to the poor, to scholars, to builders, to artists. He paid for the construction of mosques and madrasas. During the several months he spent in Cairo, prices for everything soared, and then inflation struck. Simply because too much gold had entered circulation. Egypt's economy literally collapsed. Gold lost its value. And according to Arab chroniclers, the region's economy could not recover for more than 10 years. Imagine that, one man, through his generosity, disrupted the balance of an entire country. This event was recorded by Arab historians, and thanks to them we know the details today. One of the travelers, Ibn Battuta, later wrote about Mansa Musa's incredible generosity and grandeur. And the Catalan Atlas from the 14th century, one of the most famous medieval maps of the world, shows Mansa Musa sitting on a throne in West Africa, with a golden scepter, a golden crown, and holding a gold ingot. He became a legend in his own lifetime. But like all great stories, this legend remained in the margins of history. After Mecca, Mansa Musa returned home. But he was no longer the same. He realized, his empire could be not just the center of gold, but a center of knowledge, of faith, of culture. And so he began to build. On a massive scale. With vision. For eternity. After returning from his pilgrimage, Mansa Musa was a changed man. He had seen how the world worked beyond the borders of his empire. He had witnessed the grandeur of the mosques in Cairo, the brilliance of Islamic architecture, and the universities of the Middle East. And he made a decision to turn his empire into a center of knowledge, faith, and culture. The main symbol of this transformation became the city of Timbuktu. Today, the word sounds almost mythical, something distant, forgotten, covered in sand. But in the 14th century, Timbuktu was one of the most enlightened and wealthy cities on Earth. Yes, on Earth, not just in Africa. Mansa Musa invested enormous resources into the development of the city. He brought in the best architects and scholars from Egypt and Andalusia, Islamic Spain. By his order, the legendary Djingareba Mosque was built, one of the most stunning mud brick structures that still stands today. It became not only a religious center, but also a symbol that great culture can be created in the heart of the desert. But the most important thing, Musa began building universities, libraries, schools, and madrasas. And at that moment, something began that can be called Africa's intellectual revolution. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu became a center of Islamic science, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Tens of thousands of students from across the continent studied there. Scholars, philosophers, and poets worked there. By the number of books and manuscripts, Timbuktu at the time surpassed any European library. It housed more than 700,000 handwritten manuscripts. Some of them dated back to the 9th century. These books included works on surgery, navigation, law, physics, chemistry, logic, religion, and politics, all written in the scientific language of the time, Arabic. Some manuscripts were written in African languages using the Arabic alphabet. What is especially astonishing is that in these books were formulas, calculations, star charts, and medical treatises that could rival the knowledge being produced at that time in Baghdad, Cordoba, or Cairo. So while Europe was going through the dark medieval age, people in Timbuktu were working with knowledge that was ahead of its time. One traveler who visited the city wrote, "Among them, books are wealth. Even more than gold and salt." Yes, you heard that right, books were worth more than gold. And all of this was the result of Mansa Musa's foresight. He understood that wealth without knowledge is dust. And knowledge is eternal. He invested not only in temples and palaces, but in the intellect, education, and future of his nation. But what happened to all this greatness? Why is it that today, when we hear Timbuktu, we think of something distant, dusty, and abandoned? The answer in the next part. Mansa Musa returned from his legendary pilgrimage as a hero. He left behind an incredible legacy: schools, libraries, palaces, mosques, and most importantly, a belief in the power of knowledge. But even the greatest empires eventually face change. After Mansa Musa's death in the year 1337, the slow decline of his empire began. His sons and grandsons were worthy rulers, but they lacked the political will and strategic genius that Musa had. They couldn't hold the territory, nor handle external threats and internal conflicts. The Mali Empire, which had once stretched across thousands of kilometers, began to crack at the seams. The northern borders were attacked by the Tuareg nomadic desert tribes. They conquered Gao and disrupted major trade routes. Within the empire, power struggles and separatism broke out. Even more dangerous new empires began to rise nearby: Songhai, Kanem-Bornu, and others. The city of Timbuktu continued to exist, but no longer as the heart of an empire. It became an independent intellectual haven. The libraries still operated, scholars continued their work, but the state support was gone. Worse yet, with the arrival of European expansion in the 15th and 16th centuries, Africa entered a dark age of colonialism. The Portuguese appeared on the coasts of West Africa and began trading in slaves, weapons, and gold. The continent was being torn apart. Timbuktu became cut off from the world. Trade vanished. Artisans fled. Scholars died. Libraries emptied. Thousands of manuscripts were hidden underground, sealed in clay pots, in the hope that one day someone would come back for them. Some families preserved these ancient texts for centuries, passing them down like sacred relics. They knew this wasn't just paper. It was their history, their pride, their immortality. But European colonizers ignored this knowledge. To them, Africa was darkness, savagery, and chaos. They had no interest in knowing that, in the 15th century, philosophy and medicine were being taught here while Europe was still burning witches. Timbuktu disappeared from the map. It became a symbol of something distant, lost, mythical. Some even began calling it a fabled city that supposedly didn't exist. But the truth was buried beneath the sand. Only in the 20th century did archaeologists and historians become interested in this mysterious place again. They started uncovering ancient manuscripts, tens of thousands, written by hand on leather, parchment, and palm leaves. Among them were works on algebra, physics, astronomy, law, anatomy, geography, and theology. These books rewrote the history of Africa. For the first time, the world seriously began to speak about the fact that pre-colonial Africa was not only a continent of gold, but also a continent of intellect. Timbuktu became a symbol of lost wisdom, and scholars are still working to digitize and preserve everything that hasn't yet been destroyed by sand, time, or war. In the next part, I will tell you what remains of the Mali Empire today, where the descendants of Mansa Musa are, and how Africa's wealth and knowledge are once again stepping out of the shadows. The Mali Empire, which Mansa Musa turned into Africa's superpower, vanished from the map many centuries ago. But its legacy remains. And not only in the sands of Timbuktu or the ruins of mud-brick mosques. It lives on in people. Yes, the descendants of Mansa Musa still exist. In certain regions of Mali, especially in ancient cities like Nioro, Ségou, and Bamako, families pass down oral genealogies that trace back to Mansa Musa. They honor him as an ancestor, as a symbol of lost greatness, as the man who proved that Africa is not only about resources, but also civilization, intelligence, and dignity. But what is Musa's legacy today? Thousands of manuscripts, preserved knowledge after centuries of silence. In the early 2000s, the world once again learned about Timbuktu. International organizations launched large-scale projects to preserve ancient manuscripts. More than 300,000 manuscripts were digitized, kept in private collections, clay chests, and old mosques. Many of them turned out to be historical revelations, astronomical tables describing the movement of planets, medical treatises detailing diseases and methods of treatment, political works on power, morality, and governance, books on women's rights in the Islamic Society of West Africa. Some scholars claim that if this knowledge had reached the world just a couple of centuries earlier, the history of science could have followed a different path. Tourism and pilgrimage today in Mali, despite poverty and instability, pilgrimage to places connected to Mansa Musa is still alive. Especially during Muslim holidays in Bamako and Timbuktu. Many Muslims of West Africa see Musa not just as a ruler, but as a man who fulfilled the will of Allah, uniting Islam with enlightenment, culture, and justice. But today, Mali is one of the poorest countries in the world. And that creates a heartbreaking contrast. A country that once ruled half the continent now faces terrorism, military coups, poverty, and lack of basic healthcare. Many children in Mali have never heard the name Mansa Musa. They don't know that their ancestors once created an empire where books were more valuable than gold. Mansa Musa, the richest man in history, and here lies the most astonishing fact. According to historians and economists, Mansa Musa is still considered the richest human being in all of history. Adjusted for inflation, his fortune was estimated to exceed $400 billion. For comparison, the wealth of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos does not exceed $200 billion. But Musa didn't buy yachts, rockets, or football clubs. He built libraries, mosques, and universities. He gave money to the poor. He spread knowledge. He built civilization. What remains for us? The story of Mansa Musa is not just about gold and palaces. It is a lesson that true wealth lies in intellect and culture, that even forgotten civilizations can rival modern superpowers, and that if you lead a great nation, your main mission is not to hoard, but to pass on knowledge, ideas, meaning. If this story surprised you, please like and subscribe. And if you want the whole world to know about such civilizations, write in the comments, "Yes, Africa is great."